How to avoid the 10 deadly mistakes. Now, 10 deadly mistakes, what do I mean by that? I think that all of us have been involved in a lot of meetings. And I think that we've all seen a lot of presentations. We've seen some very good ones. And I think we've also seen some very bad ones. And I think we've probably each been in presentations that were so bad, we wish we had toothpicks to keep our eyes open in order to stay awake. And as a matter of fact, what I'd like you to do right now in your small groups is just think for a second about the worst presentation you've ever seen and what made it so awful. So just stop and think about that for a second. The worst presentation you've ever seen and what made it so awful. Now, we're going to need a group leader for this activity. So what I'd like you to do is point a finger in the air, if you would. Now, when I count 3, I want you to point at the person in your group you would like to be your leader. The person with the most fingers pointed at them leads. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so group leaders, just quickly give me a high sign. Group leader, group leader, group leader, group leader. All right, would you take just 2 minutes as a group and think about the worst presentations you've ever seen, and as a group, come up with what made those presentations so bad. So take about 2 minutes to do that right now. Go. Okay.
He was just talking as a woman, back and forth, and he couldn't stand still, and he actually had all of the information he showed everybody else.
People are getting pretty good, you know, they're being trained well.
A lot of times I see a lot of presentations.
Low-quality graphics is
I mean, it's just no quality.
That's nice. That's very nice.
Can you remember any kind of more specific? And I know what you're talking about, because now when you say that, I can almost remember something.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'd like to do right now is just go from group to group, and whoever the group leader is, if you would just give me one of the things that made it so bad that came up in your discussion, and if we sort of listen up to try to avoid duplication. So why don't we start with this group right here. What's one?
No interaction.
Okay, no interaction. So the person purely presents no information, but no interaction with the audience. Okay, great. This group.
We had a speaker that moved around too much, went back and forth.
Moved around too much, you know, just, okay, like a moving target, afraid the audience is going to shoot him any second.
Right.
Okay, this group.
The speaker was a monotone and didn't hold your interest.
Okay, monotone, flat, boring voice that never changes pitch at all. Okay?
Somebody who was technically competent in the field, but simply didn't have the presentation skills to convey the information to the audience.
Okay, so sometimes what we're looking for is, we say, gee, the person had substance, no style. Sometimes they have style, but no substance. All right, and what you're talking about is substance can be really good, but there ought to be some style to help put it across.
Exactly.
Okay, and back here?
Bad overhead projector use.
Okay, bad overhead projector use. Let me ask you if you've ever heard this. Have you ever seen somebody put a transparency on an overhead, and then they say something like, and see if you can finish the sentence, now I know you can't
read this.
Yeah, read this but, or see this but. I mean, let me give you a clue. Visuals should be visible.
Right.
I mean, what's the point of showing people things that they can't see, and yet don't we see that all the time? All the time, okay? And back here.
Lack of preparation.
Okay, lack of preparation. And how many times do we have people that just think they can wing it? You know, I know the subject, and then they ramble or they forget key points, or people ask questions and they're not prepared to answer them. Okay, and another one here.
Too many statistics.
Too many statistics, and especially when you can't see them. You know, they just give you fact after fact after fact. Well, you know, what you came up with isn't that unusual. As a matter of fact, you've really touched on most of those 10 deadly mistakes. Let me give you just a couple of others, and then let's look at some keys that we can use to avoid making them when we have to present. Because the interesting thing is this: I hear a lot of managers that don't think that presentations are all that important. Or they hear the word presentation and think, oh, well, that's a sales presentation and I don't sell, so I don't have to worry about it. But you know, the interesting thing is this: we are very much judged by how we present, and more managers have to make a lot more presentations. Sometimes it's as simple as having to present a report in a meeting. Sometimes it's going in to try to justify or defend a budget. Sometimes it's submitting a proposal and a budget request, getting more funding for a project that you consider very important. Sometimes it's just delivering information that you want your staff to work on and implement. And the interesting thing is that people have a tendency to judge us. Matter of fact, there was a book written called Contact: The First 4 Minutes. And in the book, the author said that in 25 years of research, he found that people judge, make up their minds, what they think, how they feel about another person in the first 4 minutes of meeting them. And more than that, they really make up their mind in the first minute, and they spend the next 3 minutes justifying the decision they made in the first 60 seconds. And as a matter of fact, that is probably one of the deadliest mistakes, and that's that people don't know how to open a presentation. They don't open it at all. They go, well, it's 9 o'clock, time to start. And then they start, but there really is no opening. And so let me suggest to you that there are 3 tests of an effective opening in a presentation, and depending on the nature of the presentation, how important each test is might vary. But one that is always important is to ask, does the way I open break preoccupation? Just because people are in a meeting room physically does not mean that they're in the meeting room mentally. People walk into a room and they're preoccupied. They're thinking about other things. They're thinking about how bad traffic was. They're thinking about the work that's stacked up on their desk. There are all kinds of mental distractions. And so the first test of an effective opening is, does it break preoccupation? Second, does it facilitate networking? Now, if it's a shorter meeting or a shorter presentation, I don't think that's as important. But if it's a longer meeting, I think it becomes more important, because sometimes people will walk into a meeting, especially if it's across departments and multi-organizational, and they're sitting there saying, do I fit in? Am I going to be able to make a contribution? Do I know as much as these other people? And when tension goes up, retention goes down. And if we want people to hold on to the information, we have to do some things to help them feel comfortable. So second, does it facilitate networking? And then third, is the opening relevant? Does it make a point that is relevant to the topic at hand or the purpose of the meeting? And the most interesting thing that I hear so often is, oh, well, you know, if you really want to make a good presentation, open with a joke. And let me just suggest to you that I would hardly ever open with a joke, because jokes are very subjective. And can you imagine making an important presentation, starting with a joke, and when you tell a joke, you're really saying to people, you're going to find this funny. And what if they don't? Then they're also sitting there saying, you know, you thought it was funny and it wasn't. You also think your information's important. And so now they discount the value of your information based on the quality of your humor. Now, I do believe in humor, but I think we can use natural humor. Think back to what we did earlier. When you pointed a finger in the air and you chose a group leader, there was laughter. Now, some of it was nervous laughter. Ooh, it wasn't me. But also, it was just a little bit unusual. Most of you haven't done this before. But you notice it was also involvement. So think about what we just did as an opening. Did it break preoccupation? Yeah. See, involvement is the key. Anytime you've got people in a meeting or in a presentation involved with one another, you've broken preoccupation. Because you see, you can ignore a presenter. I mean, you can doodle and it looks like you're taking notes, but you're not really there. But when you've got a group of peers who are working on a task that requires your input, it's very difficult to ignore your peers. And sometimes we want the approval of our peers more than we want the approval of whoever's in the front of the room. All right, so does it break preoccupation? Does it facilitate networking? And then is it relevant? And you notice that the topic I gave you on the mistakes absolutely fits the topic of what we're talking about right now. Now, there are a number of ways that we can open a presentation, and which one we use might depend on the nature of the presentation. So let me just run through these with you. First, we can open with a story. We can open with a story. Let's say that I, as a manager, were responsible for a meeting that dealt with how to motivate employees. Then I might open with a story like this. I want you to imagine for a moment that you've been on a very fast track in your organization. Matter of fact, you've received 5 promotions in the last 18 months. And now you've got this really nice office. And you now manage everyone that's managed you in your first 3 years with the company. And you're holding your first staff meeting. You've got your 5 managers in your office. And you are a vice president. And I mean, you are feeling good. I mean, you've got this nice office. You've got this nice little conference area. You've got your 5 managers sitting there, and you're holding your very first managers meeting. Now, I want you also to imagine that you're in your mid-20s. Now, for a couple of you, that's easy. For the rest of us, imagine it anyway. And it'll be nice to reflect on that time in our lives. All right, but you're in your mid-20s, and that particular day, you wore this nice blue blazer to the office, gold buttons, and if you're a man, you wore red golf slacks. And if you're a woman, you were wearing a red skirt. Now you're about 15 minutes into this staff meeting, and the president of your company walks in the room, looks at you like this, and says, you get up, you get out of here, you leave this building, you go home, you do not come back until you are dressed like a professional. And then waits until you stand up from your staff meeting, leave your office with your 5 managers still there, you walk down the hall, down the stairs, out to the car, you get in the car. As you get in the car, you look back up, and you can see the president looking down from your office window at you. Now, as you're sitting in the car, just then, let me ask, how do you feel? Lousy. Squished. Not sure how that would translate into another language, but okay. Embarrassed, yes. Humiliated.
Very low finished.
Low, finished. All right. Now, can you imagine the next time you came in contact with those managers? Okay, now let me just step out of role for a second. Can you see how that would fit if I were beginning a meeting with my staff on creating a motivational environment by giving them a contrast. And then maybe what I would do is say, let's say that the dress really was inappropriate. What I'd like you to do is just in your small group, what are other ways that it could have been handled? All right, and so that would be a way that I could open with a story, but you notice I put you in the story. It wasn't a story about somebody else. So that's one way that I could start. Second, I could pay a compliment. People appreciate compliments if they're sincere. If they're sincere. And there's a difference between praise and flattery. A friend of mine once said, praise is calling attention to something a person is responsible for. Flattery is calling attention to something they're not responsible for. And I think there are a lot of times as we're presenting in meetings, especially if we're working with our own employees, when we can genuinely give people feedback, praise, compliment them in front of other people. As a matter of fact, there is only one thing that is better than getting a compliment from your boss in front of other people, at least that I can think of, and at least in my own experience. And that's having somebody tell me that my boss paid them a compliment about me. Or somebody comes and says, you know, Bob, you know what I just heard from your boss? He was so impressed. Or she was so impressed. And you go, whoa, they were so impressed, they're telling other people about me. So pay a compliment, but remember, if it's sincere. Another thing we can do is refer to the occasion. Maybe there's something special about this particular meeting, the date, etc. For example, let's say that the date was May 9th. Then I might start the presentation by saying, you know, there is something very special about May 9th in the life of this organization. It's not something that we've ever talked about that much. Matter of fact, maybe many of you aren't even aware of the significance of May 9th. But something very important happened. And I'll give you 30 seconds to brainstorm at your table. What do you think might have happened on May 9th that's so important to this organization? Then I would give you some time to brainstorm, and I'd take guesses. And no one's ever penalized for guessing, because that's, remember, we made it clear, just a guess. We're not really expecting you to know. And then I might say, no, May 9th is the date that this company was started. We don't talk about that very much, but that does make today, in this particular meeting, very special, because it makes today the 10th anniversary of the founding of this company. And it's also special because you are key to the success of this organization. Not so much what's happened in, say, the first 10 years, but certainly what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So I could start by referring to the occasion, or I could start with a quotation. Let's say that we wanted to brainstorm some suggestions for the future direction of the organization. And maybe some of you were used to brainstorming, maybe some of you were not, maybe some were comfortable, maybe some were not. I might start with this quote. Who first said, imagination is more important than knowledge? And again, I might let you brainstorm that as a group. And I would get your guesses. And likely there would be somebody that would get it. And some of you going, now is he really going to do this with us right now? By the way, does anybody have a guess?
Einstein.
You're absolutely right. Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. I mean, now here is a man who's acknowledged as one of the geniuses, not just of our century, but of all time. And he said imagination is what's important. And that's what we need to stimulate today. Because we need to look at the future of our organization and where we're going. And so let me say that it's not the knowledge in this room that's so important, but it's the imagination that we have to look at where we are, but more than that, where we can go. And so it might be appropriate to start with a quotation. Or I might start with a significant statement. For example, I could have started this presentation by saying there are 5 reasons a manager should be shot on the spot. And you might say, well, wait a minute. I mean, maim them a little bit, maybe cut off a finger. But, I mean, do any of us really think that there is any reason that we should be shot? Probably not. But see, it's exaggeration for effect. So I could start with a significant statement, or I could start with an unusual statistic. I could start with an unusual statistic. For example, I might start a presentation this way. Earlier, I gave you the statistic about we decide what we think and how we feel about another person in the first 4 minutes of meeting them. I could have turned that into a question, or for some of you, that might have been a very unusual statistic. Or what I could do is ask you, how much time do you think the average manager spends in meetings in an average week? And cause you to think about that, because maybe our topic is making sure that the meetings that we're in are effective, because as managers, we're in a lot of meetings. And for a lot of people, it might shock them to really track through and realize that perhaps 30 to 40% of a manager's time is spent in meetings. Well, then if we were talking about meetings, I could really have your attention in terms of, okay, what do we do to really make those meetings effective? And then finally, there's another way that I could open, and this is for an audience or a group that might be less familiar with me. And that means that I could open by doing something to establish my credibility. Now, that could be through the use of an introduction, but very often there are other ways I try to use to establish credibility than depending on an introduction. And some of those methods might be having a well put together handout, so that as people look at the meeting before it even starts, they go, oh, it looks like there's going to be some really good stuff, good content here. Or maybe I might have a very effective visual on the overhead, since, as you said earlier, many presenters use lousy visuals. The very fact that there's a good visual on the overhead, people might say, well, I guess this is going to be different than what we're used to. Or I might do something a little bit unusual, like as people come into the meeting, maybe I've got music going in the background. And again, it's something that makes it a little bit different, but it also raises people's level of expectation. How you dress can make a difference. I mean, for example, what if I began this presentation and I was wearing a yellow and green Hawaiian shirt, open to the navel, with a dozen gold chains? All right, now there are about 3 of you that are going, whoa, this is going to be great. But most of the rest of you are going, wait a second, we're here to learn about presentations, and this is how he thinks you present to a business group? Now, you see, the fact of the matter is, maybe I flew in overnight from the South Pacific. The airlines lost my luggage. It was the only thing I had to wear. But you see, we have a tendency to judge people first and understand them later. We don't really very often make up excuses for people. We tend to draw conclusions, and then later perhaps we'll look at whether or not our reasons for that conclusion were valid. Okay, so those are the things that we can do to open, but there's another thing that happens all too often, and that's that as people make presentations, they don't really focus on the audience. And what I mean by that is that people read from their notes, or they read the slides to people, but they don't really focus on the audience. And let me suggest a couple of things that can help us as we focus on the audience. Remember that every single person that you will ever speak to, and it doesn't matter if it's one-on-one in your office, a couple of people in a small staff meeting, or making a presentation to a larger group, they're tuned to 2 radio stations. The first is radio station WIIFM. And most of you have heard this before. What's in it for me? They're sitting there saying about you and your presentation, what's in it for me if I listen? What's in it for me if I apply? What's in it for me if I pay attention? And we call that WIFMs. WIFMs, and you notice the second radio station is MMFIAM. make me feel important about myself. Make me feel important about myself. And so you have our whiffums and our miffums. And what I mean by that is that I believe that one of the purposes of any presentation ought to be for people to leave impressed with themselves, not intimidated by the presenter. I mean, haven't you been in meetings where you just had the feeling that no matter how much you left knowing, the person running the meeting still knew more? And let me give you my best example. When I was in high school, I took typing. How many of you have ever taken typing and want to admit it? Okay. All right. Well, I took typing, and I walked into class, and there were 24 of us in this class, and each one of us had a brand new Facet manual typewriter. Now, that's a brand you've probably never heard of. It's from Sweden, but a manual typewriter. And the bell rang, and Louis Orr walked into the room. He was the instructor. He'd had the wood shop build about a 40-inch high platform that his typewriter was on. And he set up a copy stand, and we had identical copy, and he said, time me for 3 minutes. And then he proceeded to type 120 words per minute, perfect copy for 3 minutes. Now let me ask, how many of you think that those of us sitting there in this beginning typing class were impressed? Would you agree that we were impressed? Yeah. Absolutely. How many of you think that we were sitting there going, whoa, by the end of this course, I am going to be able to do the same thing? No way. As a matter of fact, he then showed us where the home row was because he had a thing in the front of the room showing the home row, and we put our fingers there, and he said, now you try it. And I'm going, you know, and by the time I strike the third key, I've got all three jammed against the platen, so I'm going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You know, and at the end of 3 minutes, I've got like half a line, and it looks like dark black smear. And I dropped out after the first class. Because what he did was he demonstrated a level of competence so far above where I was that I said, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to do that. Now, I don't think that was his intent, but that was the effect on me. It created a barrier, and I just quit. Well, how many times do we perhaps demonstrate a level of competence so far beyond where people are that they quit rather than feel challenged to progress? And so that's why I say we have to focus on the audience. Where are they? And can I demonstrate a level of competence that's challenging enough but also allows them to say, okay, I can do that. Now, another part of that, if we really want to involve people and make an impact with our presentation, is to make eye contact with the people that we're talking to. Because in my experience, another mistake people make is they never make eye contact. They've mastered what I've called the soft glaze. They look about 12 inches over everyone's head. And you sort of get the feeling that if I sat up a little straighter, that I'd get some eye contact. Now, there are some how-tos, though, for eye contact, and let me give you 3. Number 1, when you make eye contact with someone, look at one eye only. Now, that might sound pretty silly, but you see, our eyes tend to focus on one focal point, and if I focus on both of your eyes, I'm really looking at the bridge of your nose. So if I focus on one eye only, I have greater intensity to that eye contact. You really know that I'm looking at you. All right, so look at one eye only. Number two is 3 to 5 seconds duration. Because it'd also be possible to leave this meeting and say, okay, Pike says give eye contact. And so the next time I run a meeting, I'm going to give eye contact because I know that if I give eye contact, I'm really going to make an impact with that presentation. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to give eye contact. Am I giving you eye contact?
Yes.
Too little?
Too much.
Yeah, too much. Too much. So the second key that I would say is 3 to 5 seconds duration. See, if it's less than 3 seconds, it's almost like a mosquito that's flitting around. I'm not quite sure that he was looking at me. But if it's longer than that, it starts to get uncomfortable. The third tip that I would give you about eye contact is to make the eye contact random. Okay, you're not a camera that's been parked in a store where you start over here and say, okay, you've had your eye contact, you've had yours, 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 okay, now we're over to you. Okay, now we're going to work our way back. So make it random. Maybe it's a couple of people here, a couple of people over here, then the back, up to the front. Make it random. But especially in a smaller group, make sure that you include everybody. All right, so give people eye contact. Then there are also some things that you and I can do to create interest. And there are really two things that we can do to keep people's interest up in our presentation. Number one is to ask questions. There's only one thing that you and I are more conditioned to answer than a question, and that's the telephone. And if you don't believe that, try not answering yours the next time it rings, the second time, the third time, the fourth time, assuming you don't have some sort of answering device. I mean, we have almost a compelling need to pick up that phone. But ask questions, and let me even give you a couple of suggestions for that. I will hardly ever ask questions of the group at large, because what I find normally happens is one of two things. How many of you have ever been in a presentation where the presenter, the manager, the supervisor, the trainer, whoever it happened to be, paused and said, now before I go any further, are there any questions? What happens about 90% of the time? Yeah, there aren't any questions. Okay, now, should we then assume that everybody has totally integrated all of the content? That would be a bigger mistake than just asking, are there any questions? Now, that's 90% of the time. Probably another 5% of the time, you've got one person who goes, ooh, ooh. And in your mind, you're going, oh, no, not him. And as a matter of fact, everybody else in the room is going, oh, no, not him again. You know, because there's that one person. Now, let me ask, in your experience, does that person have a question they really want an answer to, or is it something else they're looking for? Yeah, what are they looking for? Yeah, attention, recognition. All right, well, unless the purpose of the meeting is to give that one person attention and recognition, we need a different strategy. Here's the strategy that I'll suggest. What I will do in that situation is say, I'd like you as a group to take 2 minutes to reflect on the content of our meeting or of this presentation and see if you can come up with one or two questions you'd like to ask about anything that we've covered. Now, the group starts discussing it. And now the group comes up with a question. Now, there are several advantages to this. And as a matter of fact, I want you to just think about that for a second. And I'd like you to brainstorm at your tables. Matter of fact, we're going to use the point plus system for choosing a group leader this time. Would you point a finger in the air, please? When I count 3, point to the person you want to be your group leader. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now, group leader, give me the high sign. Give me a high sign, quickly, here. All right, group leader, here's the plus. Group leaders, you have the power. You can either stay group leader, or you can look around, figure out who was most responsible for sticking you with this, and you can make them lead. All right, so it's your choice, but what I'd like you to just think about for 60 seconds is what advantages can you see of letting the group come up with questions versus as the presenter simply throwing it open and saying, are there any questions? Okay, so take 60 seconds to discuss that as a group. Go.
Most times you have a group, if you have a group, you have different people working different jobs, for instance. R&D may have engineers, this, and then everybody comes up with a question that will benefit the group as a whole versus if you're the engineering design, you don't want to know about the water flow. If you don't want to know about the water flow. That's a total team effort, not just for your group, but for the entire.
Okay, thank you very much. Quickly, let's start with this group. What's one benefit that you see?
Better thought out questions?
Okay, yes, better thought out questions. Some of us have brains that freeze. I mean, somebody says, do you have any questions? And we go, and then about 90 seconds later, our brain thaws, but by that time, it's too late to ask the question. So, good, better thought out questions. This group.
It raises questions that would otherwise be embarrassing.
All right, yes, because I might feel a lot more comfortable saying to my smaller group, here's something I was wondering, but I don't want to raise my hand and say that to the larger group. And now that question emerges from the group as the group's question, because now it's been validated by the group, and so now it's something the group wants to know rather than just one person's question. Good. This group.
When you get input from a variety of people, then you can come up with a question that would benefit the whole.
All right, absolutely. It's an opportunity for a better quality of question because, for example, I might start with one, but now you build on it. And so now we clarify it and we create something that is much more helpful to all of us. Great. And this group.
Sometimes more questions are answered. The group may be able to answer a question that a person has, and then a better question will be presented.
Okay, absolutely. Pure teaching. What we need to remember about adults is that we all bring experience to a meeting or to a presentation. And so using this method also allows us to honor the experience of people in the group so that maybe many of the questions are answered before they're even emerged. Okay? Now, the last part of a presentation is equally important. And that's how do we close that presentation? Because sometimes what happens is we don't close at all. We go, well, that's all we have time for. Thanks for coming. And there's no sense of how did this come together. And so let me suggest to you that there are 3 considerations for an effective close. First of all, does it allow for celebration? Remember I said earlier, one of the purposes is for people to leave impressed with themselves. So do we get a chance to recap our accomplishments, our decisions, the things that we're going to be doing, the action plans that we've created? Do we get a chance to celebrate what we've accomplished as a result of that meeting or as a result of that presentation? Secondly, does it allow for action planning? I believe that any action planning that's going to be done needs to happen in that presentation or in that meeting because our work days are just too filled. I mean, when we get back from a meeting, does our boss say, now I want you to sit at your desk and reflect for 15 minutes on that meeting and what you're going to do about it? Or is it, I'm glad you're back, here are 6 things that need to be done, and we're right back into the fray, and unless we take the time to reflect in that meeting, we may not have an action plan. It's just one more meeting, one more presentation that we've gone to. And then thirdly, does it tie things together? Does it tie things together? Let me give you this as a guideline. If your presentation is, say, an hour or less, look at 3 to 5 minutes to open and 3 to 5 minutes to close. If you've got a presentation that's up to 3 hours, you might look at as much as 5 to 15 minutes to open and 5 to 15 minutes to close. And there are a variety of ways that we can plan a close. First of all, we can look at a recap where we ask participants to feed back to us what they heard during the presentation or during the meeting. If I'm short on time, I might choose to summarize. I could also end with a quotation that would be appropriate to the meeting. But the way I'm going to choose to end this session is to end with a story. I was in Toronto not long ago doing a presentation I had an associate with, and at the end of the presentation, someone came up to me and said, you know, I didn't see you do anything that I couldn't do. And as that person walked away, my associate turned to me and said, well, don't you feel insulted? And I said, no, I don't feel insulted. If anything, I feel complimented. The purpose of that presentation was for people to leave feeling they could use the information I'd given and feeling that they could do the things that they saw me do. And I think that, to me, is the real key. And if you and I will apply the things we've talked about in this session, think about our openings, focus on eye contact, really pay attention to the audience, and then really wrap up, close with impact, we'll have gone a long way to improving our speaking and our presentation skills.